you everyone, first of all, for joining me today, this afternoon. We have had some really fantastic speakers today. I've been here all day. I've been online. I've been keeping a low profile and really trying to learn what people are saying and apply it to some of the things that I've been thinking of about the talk I'm going to give with you today. Empathy has been showing up everywhere in recent years. It's been multiple articles on the Harvard Business Review. There have been TV shows about it, little special snippets. There have been books written about it. I have a number of those myself. And there have been numerous, I can't even count how many online articles that are written about empathy. But what is it? Why do we need it? And how can we use it to be better employees and leaders? That's what I'm going to be discussing this afternoon. And I'll be asking a few questions along the way because I really like to know that I'm not alone, just looking at the little lighted dot on the screen here. So back as far as Plato, people have been writing about empathy. Plato said, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting hard battle." There's a Cherokee proverb and the inspiration for the images that you'll see in this deck to walk a mile in another person's shoes. A little more recently, you have Mother Teresa who says, "If you judge people, you have no time to love them." Quotes and proverbs mentioning empathy and kindness are intended to help us gain insight into the lives of others. The challenge with that is we're so often wrapped up in our own emotion, experience, or background that we're not able to do that. We're not able to see past what we're experiencing and be able to put ourselves in another's shoes. This is especially important during transformation efforts because during such efforts, the natural human resistance to change makes people less empathetic because it's stress on them, it's hard for them. And when people are stressed or sick, as I mentioned a little bit later, it's really hard for them to be empathetic. So it makes it even more important for leaders to communicate often and to communicate with empathy. Let's start by defining what empathy is. Empathy is different than the golden rule of do unto others, as Lisa and Dave mentioned earlier during their servant leadership discussion, treating others the way they wanted to be treated. Empathy is do unto others as they would want done, because others might have different tastes than you do. Whoops. Empathy is sometimes called a meta skill. What's a meta skill? A meta skill is a higher order skill that allows you to engage with functional expertise more effectively. It's a catalyst for learning and building new skills faster. So in other words, skills are temporary and meta skills are permanent. Learning a second language constitutes a skill, and your ability to learn languages is a meta skill. Once you've developed a meta skill, it becomes easier to learn a third or fourth language. And empathy is actually a meta skill because it amplifies other skills and makes it easier for us to understand other people's needs. In other words, it's being in sync with each other. The second bullet point on here is empathy is sometimes confused with sympathy. Although a lot of people consider empathy to be a basic human quality, it's actually missing in our day-to-day lives. And I would say even more so with the political climate that we have going on, it's easier to just kind of be mean to somebody in some people's eyes. It's very tempting to do so when people aren't mean to us. There's also the COVID situation. So it's a lot harder to have empathy when we're feeling even more removed from people where we're just looking at a screen instead of looking at a face. One reason for this is a lot of people confuse empathy with sympathy. They're related, but they're very distinct. And this is sometimes where people kind of look at me like I'm crazy. Sometimes it's more appropriate to show sympathy and other times empathy. So somebody asked me that once. The key to demonstrating empathy is knowing the difference, right? So imagine you will, if I told you yesterday I had to let one of my people go. I can't see the comments in the chat in the screen sharing right now. So maybe somebody could just unmute and tell me what did you think of when I said that? I actually had to, that's not a lie. I had to let somebody go yesterday.
That's painful. I have had to do that too. So I would immediately think of how I feel when I have to terminate somebody who even though we've tried, is not performing.
Thank you. And thank you for saying that, because a lot of times someone would be like, wow, that's too bad. And I wouldn't take offense at that because they don't know me, right? So somebody like you who said, and I think that sounded like Lisa, but I'm really not good with, I can't tell who all these people are, so apologies if that wasn't.
Nita Goldshine, sorry.
Nita, thank you. So that shows that you actually have a lot of empathy, and that even in this kind of virtual environment that we have where I'm staring at the screen, that you're looking at it and you're thinking, yeah, I know how that feels. I totally get it, right? And it's hard. If the same thing happened to somebody, like I said, so people who are a little more distanced say, oh, that's really too bad. And people who are closer, my friends would be like, wow, that's really hard. I'm really sorry to hear that. So it's more a matter of kind of distance with the sympathy thing. And when sympathy is used to convey pity or sorrow for somebody who's experiencing misfortune, right? If somebody has a relative who dies and you're a colleague, you'd say, oh, send a sympathy card. I'm sorry for your loss. But if it's your really good friend who has somebody who's died in their family, then that's a completely different thing. You think, oh, this is how it feels for me. So empathy is actually feeling their pain. Brene Brown has a really great video short, if you haven't seen this, about empathy. It's the difference between sympathy and empathy. In the video, she points out that empathy rarely starts with the words "at least." And oftentimes the best response is, I don't know what to say, but I'm really glad you told me, thank you. Brown describes empathy as simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating. You're not alone. When you empathize, you connect. Empathy is an element of emotional intelligence. It's part of social awareness. Emotional intelligence was first identified by John Mayer and Peter Salovey, and more recently it's been written about extensively by Daniel Goleman. What is emotional intelligence? A lot of people call it EQ. It's how we manage behavior, navigate social complexities, and make personal decisions that achieve positive results. It's your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and to use that awareness to manage your behavior and your relationships, especially when we're under pressure. Empathy is a key leadership trait. So a lot of people, we've heard a lot of discussion so far about different leadership traits. Oprah Winfrey said, leadership is about empathy. It's about having the ability to relate to and connect with people for the purpose of inspiring and empowering their lives. And if there's a celebrity that we think of when we think of empathy, it is Oprah. She has made a career out of her empathy and her ability to connect with people, even complete strangers. In relation to leadership, according to a 2018 State of the Workplace Empathy Study by Business Solver, 96% of employees consider it important for employers to demonstrate empathy, 96%. But 92% believe that trait is undervalued in their workplace. So almost all employees say, I think it's really important. But again, almost all employees say, I'm pretty sure that they're not doing it right. So it paves the way for more productive relationships. It binds people in some ways. Improving empathetic skills helps people improve their leadership effectiveness and increases their success in the job. Empathetic leaders are assets to organizations because they build and maintain relationships, and that's critical anywhere you are in the world. And we'll talk a little bit more about empathy in a couple slides. I don't have that many slides. I just do a lot of talking on each one. So there's a little more content on here that I'll just give you a second to read. All right. What are the types of empathy? So in 2007, in a podcast, Daniel Goleman of emotional intelligence fame and Paul Ekman of Emotions Revealed fame, which is about microexpressions and nonverbal communication, talked about the 3 types of empathy. Cognitive empathy. It's understanding someone else's thoughts and emotions in a very rational rather than an emotional sense. This is also called perspective taking. It's an effort to understand how people behave, think, or feel. And I can give you an actual example about cognitive empathy because it's something that we're going through in my team. We have one of our clients is a little bit challenging. So every time the team members kind of complain about her, I come back and I say, well, you know, maybe X, Y, Z, and maybe this and that and the other is going on in her life. So I sit here and I try to think like just rationally, what might be contributing to her having this behavior that they're not happy about. This kind of empathy actually can really help when you need to motivate people or when you need to negotiate. As a study at the University of Birmingham found, managers who are good at perspective taking were able to move workers to give their best efforts. Cognitive empathy is a useful skill because it enables you to put yourself in someone's shoes, but not necessarily engaging in their emotions. So you can say, okay, well, here's what they might be going through, but not actually feeling it. And so it's considered empathy by thought rather than by feeling. Emotional empathy is feeling what other people feel, and especially their pain. It's also known as emotional contagion because you're catching someone else's feelings and you feel them too. It makes someone well attuned to another person's inner emotional world, which is generally considered a plus, especially in positions like nursing or sales, as well as in personal relationships. So I see some comments coming and I apologize that I'm not seeing and addressing them. I'm hoping that someone will interrupt if there's something I should be addressing. Emotional empathy does depend on our body tuning into our emotional signals, which automatically mirror the other person's feeling. Dan Siegel, a University of Los Angeles, UCLA psychiatrist, calls the brain areas that create this resonance the we circuitry. And being in a bubble of we with another person can signify chemistry or that sense of rapport that we get when we're going well in our relationship, whether it's in a meeting, in the classroom, or between a couple. So this type of empathy is what we think of when we hear the word empathy, right? So everybody thinks if I'm going to show any sort of empathy, I have to feel that person's pain. And there's a way of being able to have the understanding, but dialing back on the feeling, the pain. And that's going back to cognitive empathy. The third type of empathy is compassionate empathy. It's understanding someone's feelings and taking appropriate action to help. The name compassionate empathy is consistent with what we understand when we talk about compassion, right? Like sympathy, compassion is about feeling concern for somebody, but with an additional move towards taking action to mitigate the situation. And this is something that we are all very good at when we're listening to somebody, but it's not necessarily what somebody wants when we're listening to them. So this kind of empathy actually uses the brain circuitry for parental love. It's a heart-to-heart connection in that sense, but it's also not out of place at work. When a leader lets somebody know she supports them, that she can be trusted, that they're free to take risks, then that's where compassionate empathy comes in. When you're showing this empathy to your people at work, you're saying, I am entrusting you that you're a professional, you're going to do well, I understand X, Y, and Z. And one of the folks, I thought of this when one of the folks who was on the call earlier pointed out that change is inevitable and constant. And so if you're giving your people that room to take risks as a leader, for them to, you create that safe space for them, then they're more able to deal with change better, and they're likely to take the same risks that they would need for the change to be a little less painful and a little less uncomfortable for them. So empathy also tells us how to best communicate with people. what matters most to people and their models of the world, and even which words to use or avoid in talking with them. So it's a very useful meta skill to have. Key elements of empathy, according to Goleman. Number one is understanding others. This is what most people understand by empathy, in Goleman's words, or sensing that other people's feelings and perspectives and taking an active interest in their concern, right? Think about some of your current and your past clients or your target audience. You probably understood more about them than you realized, especially the longer you got to know them. And the more you got to know where their pain points were, then you could understand how to help them solve their problems. You can probably come up with examples of times you were able to pick up on a mood without saying anything or without hearing anything, you walk into a room and there's just a mood in the room. So this goes to the fact that most communication is nonverbal. And when we are tuned into our empathy and we are understanding others, then we're able to better read the nonverbal communication that's going on. So people who do this tune into emotional cues. They listen well, and they do pay attention to the nonverbal communication. They show sensitivity and understand others' perspectives, and they can help other people based on their understanding of their needs and feelings. These are all skills that if somebody's on this thinking, I don't have any of these skills, I don't know how to do any of this, all of these things can be cultivated. The second element of empathy is developing others. Everyone on this call is familiar with what it means to develop others, right? You're acting on their needs and concerns, and you're helping them to reach their full potential. So people who are skilled in this area, they reward and they praise people for their strengths and accomplishments, and they provide constructive feedback on how to improve. But the way that they do so is, it's not in an unkind manner, it's in a very encouraging manner. Provide mentoring and coaching to help others develop to their full potential, and provide stretching assignments that will help their teams develop. So these are all things that are very involved with developing others. Having a service orientation. So this, if you're in the government contracting industry, which is where I live, if you're in the nonprofit industry, if you're in the international development industry, having a service orientation is really important. It means putting the needs of the customers first and looking for ways to improve in order to kind of keep their satisfaction and loyalty. People who have this approach are said to go the extra mile for customers. They really understand their customers' needs. They have developed trusted advisor relationships with customers and develop long-term relationships with customers. And this can happen really in any industry and any situation, but I found this element to be particularly important in change and transformation efforts I've been part of over the years. The very first one I was part of was when I was working at Boeing many years ago. And we were working on a team that was helping communicate around this huge re-engineering effort that Boeing was going on at Boeing. So that was my first one, my introduction to kind of change and transformation. And ever since then, it's kind of, what are the needs of the customers? What's going to resonate with them? What about the end users? What about the audience? So it's always keeping this service orientation in mind, and it will help you with your planning so you can do so more effectively, whether it's a project plan, a comms plan, or change management plan. It also helps you to influence others without authority, which is really what we have to do sometimes as program managers and project managers. We have to influence our client. We have to influence senior leaders. There are a lot of people that we have to influence. So that's, and also coming up with creative solutions to problems is possible when you're a leader who creates a safe safe place for employees to do so, as I mentioned earlier. Leveraging diversity is the next element. It means creating opportunities through different kinds of people, recognizing and celebrating that we all bring something different to the table. So there's been a huge amount of stuff on diversity recently, and the way that they're using diversity is diversity across everything, all ways of how you look, how you think, your age, your gender, your identity, everything. It doesn't mean you treat everybody the same way, but it means that you tailor the way you interact with others to fit their needs and their feelings. People who have this skill respect and relate really well to others regardless of their background. It's one of those, if you've ever met someone where you feel like they're just easy to talk to, that's usually somebody who's going to have this skill because they can just relate to many people. They generally see diversity as an opportunity, understand that diverse teams work much better than teams that are homogeneous, and challenge intolerance, bias, and stereotyping when they see that and they create an atmosphere that's respectful. The fifth element is political awareness. And most people view political skills as manipulative, but in its best sense, political means sensing and responding to a group's undercurrents and power relationships. And a better way of saying this might be situational awareness. So if you have situational awareness, you really key into what's going on and you pay attention in that respect. It can help you navigate organizational relationships effectively and allow you to achieve things where others have previously failed. So we're next going to be talking about the benefits of empathic leadership. According to a study by the Australian School of Business, the ability of a leader to be empathetic and compassionate has the greatest impact on organizational profitability and productivity. Our ability to connect with others is vital to our success as leaders and coaches. When we connect, we create the conditions for important conversations to occur. And when this happens, our work improves and our team's work improve. And by the way, empathy is not just for business. The US Army, in its Army Field Manual on Leader Development, insists repeatedly that empathy is essential for competent leadership. So one of the benefits is innovation. Empathy can expand your horizons and extend your thinking. By understanding an unfamiliar point of view, you can stretch and you can test new perspectives and ideas. This is key for successful innovation and important to ensuring that any of your thinking doesn't stagnate, so that you don't get stale in how you're doing it. Recent Harvard Business Review article, I'm a big fan of Harvard Business Review. It's called "To Foster Innovation, Create a Culture of Intellectual Bravery." It defines intellectual bravery as a willingness to disagree, dissent, or challenge the status quo, challenge the status quo in setting of social risk when you could be embarrassed, marginalized, or punished in some way. I can't speak this afternoon, just one second. Okay. Responsibility for creating a culture of intellectual bravery, the article states, depends on leadership. And what was I talking about earlier as far as leaders creating a safe space for people by being empathetic? Whether or not your company has a culture of intellectual bravery depends on your ability to establish a pattern of reward rather than punished vulnerability. That's a quote from the article. So because leaders set the tone, they need to make it safe. Trust and collaboration and increased loyalty. Empathy enables you to know if the people you're trying to reach are actually being reached. Without it, you can't build a team. You also cannot influence people like sponsors and decision makers, which is something Chris Gonzalez spoke about earlier. Understanding another person's emotional needs can look like a manager recognizing that as an employee is having a hard day because of a family emergency and needs time off. It can look like a team leader who is meeting with a team member to discuss dynamics and how to improve them. It can look like collaborating rather than competing, taking a genuine interest in employees, and leading by example. Those are other instances. According to Robin Stern, Associate Director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, when someone feels seen and heard by you, they begin to trust you. When your employees trust you, their job happiness and their loyalty go up. And empathy facilitates cooperation among your employees as well which is critical for teams, especially in this day and age. In a study that was published on elifesciences.org, when empathy was introduced into decision-making, it increased cooperation and even caused people to become more empathetic. In other words, empathy fostered more empathy.
Karin, just wanted to ping you. There is a question here from Victoria. How do you establish empathetic leadership when most team members are introverts and connecting is not natural for them?
I actually am an introvert, so I'm understanding what you're saying. I know I'm giving this thing in front of a bunch of people, but I'm actually, I actually am an introvert, but I think as a leader, it's important to lead by example. So you actually set the tone, and people don't have to sit there and talk all the time, but they can feel connected to each other regardless of that. It's just a matter of how you treat people, how they see you treating your clients. They will follow suit in how you're treating people.
Great. And there was also an additional insight from Beth May here, where she basically just said, you want to connect those employees, connect them one by one on their level based on preferences. And she also mentioned something about treat others the way you want to be treated, and points out the great article from HBR on fostering innovation, cultivating culture of intellectual bravery.
Yes. And I would say it's not treating others how you want to be treated. It's really thinking, how do they want to be treated? Because not everybody wants to be treated the same way you do.
That's what I meant. I think I misread that. Sorry.
Okay. Others, I'm seeing a couple others pop in. Okay, I'll keep going.
Keep going.
Okay. Better decision-making, increased agility / adaptability. Empathetic leadership is actually very often overlooked as a performance indicator. However, research, I know I keep bringing up more research. I can send information to people at the end with some of these links and names if you'd like. Research from the Center for Creative Leadership, and I also have a white paper from them, has shown that today's successful leaders must be more person-focused and be able to work with people from varying teams, departments, countries, cultures, backgrounds, and I would also say ages, because we are now in a time where we have 5 generations in the workforce. This is unprecedented. And it's become even more important for us as leaders to provide the example for other people when it comes to interacting with people from any of these areas. To determine if empathy influences a manager's job performance, the CCL analyzed data from more than 6,700 managers in 38 countries. They found that empathy in the workplace is positively related to job performance. And managers who practice empathetic leadership toward direct reports are viewed as better performers in their job by their boss. The findings were consistent across the sample. Managers who were rated as empathetic by subordinates were also rated as high performing by their boss. So the ability to be compassionate and connect with others is critical to our lives, both personally and professionally. And this is, I think, becoming more and more visible again right now during COVID, right? You see more people seeking mental health services because they feel so alone. They have no one to interact with on a regular basis. So they're not feeling that connection with people. Demonstrating empathy in human interactions also, it can lead to more effective communication and positive outcomes. And that's at home as well as at work. Another benefit of empathetic leadership is enhanced conflict resolution. It's important, especially when you disagree with others, and that's when it's the hardest. It requires a lot of effort. It really does. It's easier to empathize as well if somebody is similar to you or you have something in common. So it's much easier to kind of, hey, yeah, it's us against them type of thing. But it is more important and beneficial when empathy lets you see something different than what you're seeing in your own mind. So when you consider other perspectives, it might not change your mind, but it can help you appreciate others and connect in a new way with them. And again, especially during a conflict situation, it's really important to find human similarity. It's really important to look at the person and say, this person is a human just like me. And that's what creates the condition for empathy. And it's, like I said, it's really hard during a conflict. If you think about it, when you're having a conflict, let's just a personal relationship, right? And you're thinking, I just want them to be able to climb inside my mind and feel the way I'm feeling, and then they wouldn't be acting the way they're acting. And why isn't it that you brought home this and that and the other when I wanted you to do this, you know, thus and such? And so we're not communicating effectively, and we're not stepping out of ourselves to have empathy for the other during our conflicts. And it's really important that we at least try to do so. So as far as leadership and empathy, Maya Angelou said, I think we all have empathy. We may not have enough courage to display it. So not everything about empathy is fantastic butterflies and rainbows and everything's going to go really well, right? There are some pitfalls to showing empathy. One of which is
Karin, let me interrupt you before you go on the next slide. I have a question from Elaine Jackson. She was asking, how can one show empathy for others that are of a different race?
I think it really depends on the context. For me, I treat everybody with respect, and in the workplace, it's different than outside in a personal situation. So with some of the racial tension that we have going on right now, I think it's very important that, for example, I, as a person who is white and therefore privileged in our country, I'm very willing to be vulnerable and to have conversations with my friends who are of different races and say, tell me how it is for you, and to just listen and to not try to say, no, that can't be, but just listen. And I've had friends tell me, and colleagues actually tell me about some of their situation, some of the things they've had to endure growing up. I think just being vulnerable is really important, and showing that you just want to hear their side, that you really want to try. I will never be able to understand it, but I'd like to at least try.
And learn it from a different perspective.
Absolutely.
I think this is also very much related to your very own self-awareness, right? In order for you to connect with other people, not just people of different race, but people in general, is that your own understanding of yourself, what makes you frustrated, what ticks you off, and what makes you happy, and things like that. So this is truly an element of emotional intelligence, as you had laid out earlier.
Yes.
All right.
All right. So one potential pitfall for empathy is poor decision making. It has the power to hurt your judgment and to lead to poor decision making in business. Business leaders have to be able to balance, right? What's best for the organization and being kind and considerate to individual employees. In other words, sometimes it can go wrong if our feelings and emotions lead us to favor a single person rather than the group as a whole. And I don't have any examples for that personally, but I do know that it happens out there. So, burnout. Empathy takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of emotions. And for some of us, it's very emotionally draining, right? After I had to terminate somebody yesterday, I came home and I was emotionally just drained. And I had to do a couple things to kind of recover and fill my cup up again and get my energy back. So empathy can deplete your mental resources, and jobs that require constant empathy, think nurses, right? Think other healthcare professionals, right? Especially right now, that can lead to compassion fatigue, which is an acute inability to empathize that's driven by stress and burnout, which is a more gradual and constant version of this. Bias, right? Empathy can lead to bias because we tend to be emotionally connected to people with whom we have similarities. And that leads to bias towards people we are like, and it prevents diversity in organizations. You can see how it's prevented diversity in organizations, in our government. So there's some strides that are being made, but it's still kind of overall been the same for a long time. So it's important for us to use empathy, but to make sure we calibrate it. Too much or too little can cause a disconnect. And to grow and develop this meta skill, it's very important that we notice where we are, not over empathizing and not missing these opportunities to connect. And this is, again, this is not an easy skill to do. It requires a high level of self-awareness to be able to step outside yourself and just observe where you are. So on here, like everything, the secret is balance. Emotional regulation is important because it allows you to manage what you're feeling, even in times of great stress, without feeling overwhelmed. Okay, back to happy news. Let's just say you're sitting here thinking, as I'm going through this, you're thinking, this sounds really hard. And I don't know how to do it. I wasn't born with this skill. I have never really, I know some people who are terrible at this. So how can it be developed, right? Is all hope lost? No. And I just forwarded a little too fast. So capacity for empathy, it's innate, right? It's a human trait. And like all traits, there's a spectrum of strength and weakness. Some people are very, very gifted, right? They are really good at connecting with people, naturally empathetic, like again, Oprah Winfrey. It's a capability we all have though. And because we all crave connectedness and our brains are wired to mirror others. So think about it. If you're thinking, this sounds like a really hard thing to do, what happens when you see somebody yawn, right? Somebody type in the comments and I'll try to catch this one. What happens when you see somebody yawn? You want to yawn. Yes, exactly, right? What else? Have another way that you've experienced empathy without even realizing it? How many of you, while you're in a conversation with somebody, and okay, just think back pre-COVID, right? Sorry, that you find yourself mirroring their gestures, right? They're sitting there leaning on the table and they're really intense, and all of a sudden you find you're leaning on the table too. Or they do certain gestures and they drink from their coffee and all of a sudden you're drinking from your coffee, right? These are proof that you have empathy for others. So if you think that all hope is lost, it's not. By the way, research shows children as young as 2 demonstrate understanding that others have different perspectives from their own. And they prefer to hear the sounds of other babies rather than older voices because they want to align and they've got affinity for people who are more like them. So if you're naturally low on the empathy scale, think about who's going to be impacted when you talk. Try not to just recognize that you're saying something, but to kind of care about the impact that it has on somebody else. All right, here are some ways you can develop empathy. The first one's already up there. Practice presence. Sometimes it's useful to let go of the idea of doing something all the time, right? Shift your intention to simply be present with empathy. And the resulting state of empathic presence, your experience can include an ongoing sensing of what's going on in yourself and others. And some things, verbal expressions can happen simultaneously within the context of that sensing, right? So how do you get into a state of empathic presence? First, you quiet your mind. I know, I'm sitting here talking to a bunch of project managers and you're like, that's not possible. Well, it actually is possible. There are some breathing techniques and meditation techniques. I know I said the word meditation, but it's really helpful for practicing presence. So there are some techniques that you can use to get into that state. for quieting your mind. Expand your awareness to include a respectful understanding of both my experience and the experience of others. And then notice, is any action being called for on my part? So think about it, right? Have you ever been talking to somebody who is saying, I'm having this challenge at work right now. I've got this employee who's a really hard thing, or I'm going through this decision that I'm struggling with, right? And what happens? You immediately go into problem solving mode, right? You immediately start telling them, here's what you need to do. And how does it feel when someone does that to you, right? If you're sitting there just saying, I just want to be heard, I just want someone to care that I'm going through this, and they say, well, you should do blah, blah, this and blah, blah, that. Man, when someone does that to me, I just sit there thinking, that's not what you're here for. I'm here, I want you to just listen. So practicing presence involves resisting that impulse and just being with somebody. And that's so hard for people. Also really important is to say, you know what? I don't know what to say or do, or, hey, what is it you'd like me to do here? Would you like me to listen? Would you like me to listen and give you some suggestions? What would you like out of the conversation? And that will help set some groundwork for the conversation. And that's really difficult because for a lot of people, they're fighting a natural impulse to help, but it's most important to just be present. There's a lot of comments coming up during that. Taking care of yourself. Connecting to our own needs better equips us to attend to the needs of others. I'm not sure if anyone has heard of Kristen Neff. She's a leading researcher in the field of self-compassion. And in her book called Selfcompassion, she defines it as being open to and moved by one's own suffering, experiencing feelings of caring and kindness towards oneself, taking an understanding and non-judgmental attitude towards one's inadequacies and failures, and recognizing that one's experience is part of the common human experience. That's the goal of self-compassion, is you treat yourself in the same way that the most compassionate person you know would treat you. And you talk to yourself in the same supporting ways, and that way you have more security in yourself and more kindness for yourself. You're better able to show that kindness to other people. Listen actively and stay humble. Active listening is one of the best ways to show empathy. It's the best way to demonstrate it in a workplace, as it lets the other person know they've been heard and understood. As a listener, a lot of people sit there while the other person is talking and sit there thinking of what they're going to say in response. So they're already formulating their response instead of listening to somebody. They're sitting there and they're thinking of what they're going to say back. So that's not necessarily very helpful for somebody who's speaking, and it also can lead to misunderstanding and some arguments. Instead, try listening without any judgment and let them know they've been heard by finding a way to paraphrase back to them what they said to you. The ultimate in active listening is called radical listening. It requires really being present to what's going on with the other person at that very moment. In other words, what is the other person's emotional state and what are their needs? And that's something that may not be something you practice at work, but you can practice at home. But when you listen to employees' needs and suggestions, you do foster satisfaction. Get to know people. So empathy in the workplace means making a genuine effort to understand where the people are coming from and providing direction that leaves room for compromise and conflicting points of view. When you have to tell a team member something that they won't like, you use what you've learned while actively listening to soften the blow and let them know you care. And so the thing is, even when you're giving an unpleasant message, if people know that you're not happy about it or that you care about them as a person, it does soften the blow a bit, and people will respect you more and they'll trust your organization and you more as well. So pay attention to nonverbal cues. Helen Rice is the author of The Empathy Effect. She outlines a way to become more adept at perceiving others' emotions and find ways and encourage perspective taking. She developed a program called Empathics, which has been taught to physicians and has led to successful ability to read emotions, decreasing burnout, and increasing patient satisfaction. I'm just going to go through what they're called very quickly. And again, I can provide more information on it because I don't even know what time it is right now. I just don't want to go over time. So she uses the acronym EMPATHY to outline the steps of her program. E is eye contact. M is muscles in facial expression. P is posture. A is affect or emotions. T is tone. And H is hearing. And Y is your response. So here's a funny thing. Here's a funny thing about that. I'll use myself as an example again because I'm the one doing the talking, I guess. So last week I had to have an unpleasant discussion with somebody else, and I left a voicemail for her. And when I followed up and had an in-person conversation with her, and she just said, "You had such a harsh tone in your voice on that voicemail." And it just kind of smacked me right in the face that I was letting my frustration come through in my tone of voice. So she didn't even see me. She wasn't, it was only on a verbal call, and she nailed it. And I felt bad and I apologized for it. But it's being mindful of all the ways that we come across to people. And that's why, Zoom is much better, for example, than some of the other methods of communicating. So Doug was talking about that a little bit earlier as far as the virtual water cooler discussions and having conversations and the social distancing and tools that we're using. Daniel Goleman again, he recently addressed this very thing. He outlined a hierarchy of communications tech when it comes to empathy. Face-to-face is by far the best, right? We get all of the full emotion signal. We can see, we can hear the tone, any gesture, any facial expression. Face-to-face, but at a safe distance, the new coronavirus norm, he said, is not bad. He said, other emotion signals can still come through unless you're too far away for it. If you're, 20 feet away, that's different. He said, video to distance is next, Zoom, WebEx, etc., because you can see and hear the person. You have pretty good access to their emotion signals. But of course, people divide their attention, right? So a pet distracts us, a baby distracts us, or you're checking your phone for text messages instead of being fully present in what's going on. And then he also mentioned two other losses in a virtual link. He said, we can't make eye contact. So for example, I'm looking at the camera right now and you can see me, but I can't see you. So I don't see how any of you are feeling or responding right now. And it's largely because of how I have my screen up, but in general, it's one of those limits of Zoom and other technologies like this. And it's really hard to pick up any micro expressions because it's a flat picture. We don't get to see quite at the level that we would in person. He says phone is not terrible because the voice carries a really large emotion signal, as evidenced by my story. And text is the worst. So there's difficulty recognizing tone in text. There's difficulty recognizing, you can't see facial expressions. You have no idea what the intent is when they're writing something. If it's something that can be interpreted in different ways, you can see it as they're mad. They can see it as they're joking. Text is very, very hard. All right, so there are a few more on developing empathy. Lead with questions, right? It's amazing how effective it is when you ask people about themselves or when you show an interest in their life in any way. Not the standard DC, what do you do, but actually showing an interest in who a person is. So leading with questions helps to create that connection that we are talking about. Consider other perspectives or be curious, right? Curious people really like to look at things from multiple perspectives. They like to think about all the different sides of an argument. They like to kind of dive into research, for example, and learn all these things. It expands our empathy when we talk to people outside our own social circle as well. If we're willing to have a difficult conversation because we're curious about what's going on inside another person, if we're willing to read some of these things that will give us that different perspective and enable us to forge more connections, this is where curiosity is very good for us. Happiness guru Martin Seligman identifies curiosity as a key character strength that can enhance life satisfaction. But it requires a person to really try to understand the world inside the head of the other person. So again, if you're having a difficult employee, if you have a difficult client, how can you understand that person rather than trying to silence them? And along those lines, how many times do we find ourselves interrupting when we're talking to people? Are we showing curiosity at that point, or are we going back to the I'm just listening to respond mode, which is so common? So Simon Sinek has a test of leadership. He said, when you ask someone how they're doing, do you really care? So, bite your tongue or withhold judgment. Man, it's easy to judge, especially in this day and age, right? You see somebody, how many times have I heard or read about somebody who looks like they are down and out, but otherwise have this really nice cell phone or have a nice manicure, or somebody, somebody's judging somebody by their hair color or by something. It's so easy to judge somebody, but it's so much more important to try to connect with them, right? To try to find out who they are and where they're coming from. Never stop learning, or consider impact. So again, kind of goes along with the last thing and with a lot of things that we've been saying here, right? What are the impact your words are going to say? What's the impact the tone you're using is going to have? And this is really hard stuff, right? Especially if you're mad, is just kind of taking a few moments and not letting some of that come through, and making sure that we're communicating in a more connective way. So I had already said, never stop learning. The more education we have, the better able we are to develop healthy emotions and responses to people. You will have other experiences and connections that will help you learn how to understand the other person, their skills, and it will help you become a better leader. So, in closing, thank you for your participation, for your comments and your questions. I don't know how much time we have. I think we might have a few
Karin,
more, but I just got a little bit more to say, and then I'll show my last slide. If you're a manager, the next time an employee comes to you with a problem or the complaint, just don't think, oh my God, not again, right? Think about a time when you had a problem and how did your manager treat you? If it's the same way, how did you feel when they treated you that way? Ask yourself, why does this person feel this way? And what can I do to make the situation better? And also, it's gonna help motivate them. There's gonna be benefits to the working relationship. And if you are an employee who feels like your manager is being unreasonable, try to understand why that's going on. So again, it's always trying to get inside the other person's head, right? Simply put, empathy begins by giving others the benefit of the doubt. Here are some of the authors I mentioned during this conversation. Not all of them, because there are some studies that I mentioned, but these are some of the authors. And this is going to be, I think this is going to be shared with people. And thank you again for your attention. It's much appreciated. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak at this session. Now, I assume there's a little bit of time left for some comments or questions.
We've actually run a little bit behind, but I never
Oh, my
interrupted you
apologies.
because yeah, we are about 7 minutes, but we will try to catch up on. There's a lot of interaction going on in the room. In summary, they are agreeing with your presentation. There was a question from Elaine Jackson earlier. Why are we expected to be sympathetic to like the bullies? And I think that Amos shared, his insights. And this might answer Elaine's question. Amos was pointing out that there are behaviors that occur that people do and that they are not aware that they are doing it. And so I think it relates back to, your own understanding of like what frustrates you and you understanding your own biases, right? Do you have any additional insights for that?
I would also say people are usually bullies for a reason, right? There's usually some level of insecurity. There's some level of, there's something that hasn't been addressed. If somebody is trying to put somebody else down, it's because they feel terrible about themselves. So I would say maybe this is not easy. It's really not easy to put hurt aside, but try to have a conversation and to find out why that's going on.
Right. And understanding and at the same time, explaining why this is a bad behavior.
Absolutely.
Because you cannot just sit down and be like, oh, okay, I understand you. And then you see this person repeating the bad behavior. You need to call that person out. And
in a nice way.
Exactly. Anyway, also wanted to thank you for sharing your experience about, I'm really sorry about you having to let go of a person, laying somebody is awful. And I appreciate the fact, that you're sharing that experience, how it's done from, a manager's perspective. For those leaders out there or, project managers out there who are on the verge of also, letting people go because of, what's happening, COVID, reduction in force, budget is not going well and stuff like that. I think it's a good reminder that it is important to have that empathy to your staff. It will be greatly appreciated if you can, repeat that, this isn't your fault. This is not a fault of your own. This is a business decision that we have to do. Wanted to reiterate your contribution to the project and blah, blah, blah. I think staff will truly appreciate that. With that being said, I hope that everybody is still around. We have great speaker. Our last speaker is Elaine Jackson. And again, Karin, thank you so much for wonderful presentation. Very well accepted.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for attending and for the encouragement. It's very appreciated.